Hello, and welcome back to Early Global Cultures. I'm Professor Amy Young, and today we're going to explore ancient China. I think you'll notice some dramatic departures from the Western ideal here, and that's part of what makes China so interesting, is they too were a powerhouse of civilization, and their differences got me wondering, what do we want our culture's expression to look like? Why do we like what we like, and how does it represent our culture? Here I've got several images of the Mona Lisa and her likeness on display. She's one of the most famous paintings in the Western tradition, but why is she so famous? Is it because she represents ideal beauty? Is it her mystery or her individuality that we're drawn to? Do we admire her creator for his skill and innovation? Without a doubt, in the West, we like our representations generally to be realistic. We want to literally see ourselves in them. And that may have something to do with our individualistic nature. We saw this sprout up in Greece, and that Western tradition doesn't ever really die. But the Mona Lisa is not something that everyone can relate to. She's not even Leonardo's best work. No, the Mona Lisa is famous because she's famous. Once upon a time, someone tried to steal her, and ever since, we've all decided that she's important. Does that tell you something about how we determine worth in the West? Do our representations reflect how our culture values individual fame or wealth or success? As we explore the very different culture of China in the East, see if you can tell where their focus is at, as well as how and why it differs from our own. Today, in early global cultures, we'll see if we can understand the historical and philosophical context of ancient China, and then we'll compare and contrast Chinese arts with the arts of other early civilizations. And we'll see if we can examine the philosophies, arts, and literature of Chinese dynasties too. And as we do so, we'll look at how those also reveal something of China's values and beliefs. And here's the area we'll talk about today, or rather, here's where it begins. Interestingly, like other early civilizations, China's geography and topography may have something to do with the development of its values. In northern China, civilization crops up in the fertile valleys of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. Here, they domesticated animals early on and lived an agrarian lifestyle. All of this aided by the presence and use of loess, an extremely fertile sediment that they used in the growing of crops and the creation of permanent structures. All of this led to a Chinese culture that appreciated what nature had to offer. And it was also a culture that sought balance in union, one that appreciated what people could create together, a collectivist culture. Plus, there are interesting similarities and differences with other cultures we've studied. For instance, there are powerful dynasties and cultural advances, but the arts are a little different. Here we'll see a focus on nature, religion, and relationships more than we'll see heroic epics and human perfection. See what you think as you examine their beliefs and their arts. How are they similar to or different than your own? Though there were earlier trappings of civilization here, there were Neolithic cultures in China too, we'll start with the Shang dynasty. This dynasty bore all of the hallmarks of civilization we've discussed before. There was bronze craftsmanship, trade, commerce, bureaucracy, urban centers, and a system of writing, actually, one that's very close to modern Chinese writing. In this era, kings were intermediaries between the people and the spirit world. They presided over the people and interpreted the will of the gods and spirits. And they ruled from a dragon throne. See, the dragon was a mythical creature that flew between the earth and sky, bringing rain and, more importantly, bringing fertility. And with the power of the dragon on their side, the Chinese believed that these rulers also controlled the most prosperous aspects of Chinese life. Interestingly, in this era, there is also some diversity in rulership. Divine rule was with the king, but practical rule was divided amongst nobles. In fact, here they have an aristocracy of merit. That means that leadership is granted to those who can prove worth via testing. So they have both their education and their ability assessed before they're given any power. How does that compare to other civilizations in this time frame? Places like Mesopotamia and Egypt. Also, like many other early civilizations, religion played a large role in Chinese life. Here there was a belief in localized spirits, and they also worshipped the heaven and the earth as the realms of the spirits. Then there were spirits of the winds, clouds, rain, thunder, hills, streams, roads, mountains, and so on. Interestingly, they also had bad spirits. There'd be spirits in lonely spots on the road, in shadows, in water, in soil, in the air, or even in the household. Sometimes they'd take the shape of demons. Animal demons were tigers and werewolves, and there were even plant and inanimate object demons. So ultimately, the spirits needed to be warded off, appeased, and or thanked to ensure peace and prosperity. Firecrackers, bonfires, torches, and lanterns were used during New Year's festivals to ward off evil spirits, and altars and offerings were used to appease spirits or offer thanks. In addition to these localized spirits, there are personal spirits, as in early China, they practice ancestor veneration. For them, dead ancestors are intermediaries between the earth and the spirit world, so they considered them to be very powerful spirits. And moreover, they're concerned with the welfare of their living descendants. They're capable of punitive anger, even if they're displeased by their descendants. So everyone needs to be on their toes, and the living need to maintain a strong bond with their ancestors. For many, this meant they kept an ancestral shrine in the home, and they would pray to ancestors to keep their memories alive. They would also offer them sacrifices and provide them with food, and then they would also burn paper replicas of supplies that their ancestors might need in the afterlife. Money, houses, even furniture was transmitted to the spirit world via smoke. And for all of this, diviners were super important too. Diviners would divine or read the present state of things, interpret the will of the spirits, and predict the future too. To do this, they used earth elements, palmistry, astrology, and they also looked for omens. Plus, they had the assistance of a very important book, the I Ching, or the Book of Changes. The I Ching is basically a guide to the universe. It offered insight into situations and advice on right behaviors. Overall, it was complicated both in its use and its structure, as it used symbols and commentaries to determine right action, and it incorporated nature as a balancer of change. In this book of beliefs and values, there is no good or evil, just a constant struggle to balance yang and yin. Chinese emperors called yang and yin the foundation of the entire universe. The force of yang is characterized as active, warm, dry, procreative, and expansive. With this character, it's likely to be dominant in males, but really, it's dominant in anything with heat in it. So the sun, light, fire, things like that. Yin, however, has a different character. It's slow, fertile, dark, cold, wet, and mysterious. It's thought to be more present in females, and it's seen as dominant in the shadows. Either yin or yang may be present in a single entity from one moment to the next. Some qualities may lie deeply dormant, but everything and everyone has the potential to go either way. In the universe, what makes things different is not the nature of the stuff with which they're composed, but rather it's their actions, and they're acting yin or they're acting yang. The I Ching helps sort all this out, and it offers instructions on how to balance the two as well. So here are some symbols we'd see referenced in the I Ching, though this is a super simplified version. And using these symbols, there are a couple of ways to get advice. Mostly, though, it's a game of chance or fate. Diviners would toss coins or yarrow stalks, and how the materials land determines where in the I Ching they should consult for advice. Here we can see all of the earth elements that are incorporated in their divination, as well as the focus on balancing those elements to achieve a harmonious life. So, what does this indicate about values and beliefs in ancient China? In addition to this early religion, they also had very interesting early arts. They were very skilled in bronze craftsmanship, and their bronze artifacts reveal their interpretation of local beliefs and decorative preferences. This bronze elephant is nearly 9 inches tall, and the design carved into it is actually comprised of dozens of other animals, though their depictions are symbolic rather than realistic. The piece was likely used in rituals, and for this as well as other valuable bronze pieces, the Chinese limited the number that could be owned by lower levels of society. This was likely because the lower levels of society hadn't merited the status needed to handle such a sacred object. And things get even more interesting in the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou are rebels and they overthrow the Shang. They do this with the help of the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven states that the emperor is given the throne by heaven, and heaven made it so, so heaven wants it that way. Once he's got the mandate, the emperor doesn't have it easy, though. He must perform the rituals necessary to appease the spirits because, you guessed it, he was given that duty by heaven. So basically, the prosperity of civilization is dependent on the emperor, and they hold him accountable as such. If he doesn't fulfill his duty, the people have the right to revolt, and heaven would always guide him and the people so that the right ruler is on the throne. And this is where the Zhou say that the Shang failed. When they take over, they rule China like a feudal state. Instead of having a strong central government, the emperors coordinated separate kingdoms, each with its own local lord. Then regional princes would pay a fealty to the Zhou kings. In this feudal system, they still held the emperor accountable for the stability of civilization, though. And there was a strict code of conduct as to how people should behave within each level of the feudal system, too. They even divvied up who was supposed to pray and sacrifice to which spirits. Eventually, the Zhou system collapses as princes each vie for power in what's called the Warring States period. But for a time, they represented a pinnacle of cultural refinement and philosophical accomplishment. In fact, the Jing, or the Book of Songs, was started in the Zhou dynasty and it was continued afterwards. It features abundant songs about nature and glorious kings and about the everyday changes in life in China. Additionally, the philosophies of Daoism and Confucianism were born in this era. Plus, there were beautiful arts in this era, too. This dragon pendant is from the late Zhou dynasty during that Warring States period. It's made of green jade and it reflects that desire for balance and prosperity that comes with the dragon throne. So even though it's not an image of the ruler, it still speaks to the ruler's power and responsibility, as well as the power of nature and the spirit world. And here's a poem from the Book of Songs that was developed in this dynasty. It reflects something of the simpler life, but it may also be a commentary on Chinese society. See what you think. Big rat, do not gobble our millet. 3 years we have slaved for you, yet you take no notice of us. At last we are going to leave you and go to that happy land, where we shall have our place. Big rat, do not gobble our corn. 3 years we have slaved for you, yet you give us no credit. At last we're going to leave you and go to that happy kingdom, where we shall get our due. Big rat, do not eat our rice shoots. 3 years we have slaved for you, yet you did nothing to reward us. At last we're going to leave you and go to those happy borders, where no sad songs are sung. You can probably see that this has something to do with farm life, but what else is being said here? Who might that rat be a metaphor for? And there's some interesting philosophy in this dynasty, too. Daoism is a philosophy founded by Lao Tzu, and generally it's a mystical school of thought that emphasizes the limitations of human perception and instead notices harmony and order in nature. The concept of this philosophy is the way, or the Tao, and this is thought to be the eternal way of the universe. It sets out the standard procedure of things, or the correct method of the universe's operation and behavior. The Tao Te Ching outlines this philosophy in verse, and it says there is a pre-established pattern into which all things fall. And that pattern naturally leans towards peace and prosperity. In fact, the universe would always go the way of balance and cooperation if human beings would accept their nature and remain in harmony with the Tao. The Tao Te Ching states, one should follow one's own nature, not distinguishing between good and bad, but recognizing both as the way. Does this remind you of that yang and yin stuff? It should. The Tao, or the way, is ultimately unity with nature. It has nothing to do with doing or analyzing, as Lao Tzu thought that the search for knowledge only perverted the simplicity in which people were meant to live. Instead, he stated that those who speak of the Tao do not know the Tao, and those who know it do not speak of it. In the end, the Tao Te Ching sees society as overly dominated by yang, and it emphasizes counterbalancing with yin values, so quietness, reverence, and oneness with nature. And Lao Tzu generally discouraged followers from participating in society or culture or even actively trying to change them. Rather, he encouraged passivity and resignation, or yin. To him, all of our attempts to control nature are the causes of our discomfort. Yes, we can make changes, we can control, but it can't last as it disrupts the balance. Instead of controlling, the Tao encourages spontaneity. Any idea why? Why? Because you've got to be ready to roll with the Tao at any moment. You must be nimble and pliant rather than insisting on your own plans. And even the central image of much of the Tao is water, as it states, the soft yield of water cleaves the obstinate stone. So, as water flows, it gives way to the rocks, but over time, it can wear away that stone. And this is like the Tao. The Tao invariably does nothing, and yet there is nothing that is not done. And if you go with the flow, you'll be rewarded with contentment, love, and peace. Another school of thought comes to us from Confucius. Confucius came from a noble family that fell in status, but he studied music and poetry, and he taught history, philosophy, and government. He even edited books for state use. In his philosophy, though, he sought harmony between the cosmic and social order. So here there is less spiritual and more practical wisdom. Overall, Confucianism is big on relationships. It lays out the details for an ordered and ethical society wherein all people should participate in securing the general good. His musings are recorded in Analectics, an artifact written after his death, but nonetheless, it does a good job of outlining his ideas. According to Confucius, behavior, not birth, determines one's status. And he makes no comment on religion, but promotes obedience to tradition and proper conduct. Here, harmony in relationships creates harmony in the home, which then creates harmony in the state, and so on. So in Confucianism, no one ever really comes of age in the Western sense. They have a duty to their family until death, and this is essential to a harmonious social structure. This duty to family, by the way, is called filial piety. Confucius also asserts that the state exists for the benefit of the people, not the other way around, and he advocates for a top down morality, supporting goodwill over statutory law. He says that reform in society begins with the rulers. To him, it makes sense that a good example may prevent crime, but statutory law only punishes it. In this vein, a well ordered state cannot be legislated into existence, and in the best circumstances, cooperative goodwill makes law unnecessary. The way to get to that cooperative goodwill is embodied in a few basic tenets. First, there is li, or propriety, and this calls for right conduct in rites and ancestor worship or filial piety. Then there is ren, or benevolence, which calls for compassion and goodness in all relationships. And lastly, wen is the resulting peaceful culture, all of which is seen in the creation and expression of poetry, arts, music, and so on. So, what do you think? Do these belief systems have anything in common? In both, there seems to be a striving for balance and unity, but where does that come from? And how is it different than other cultures we've studied? With the turmoil of the Warring States period, China was ready for a new ruler. And Qin, who China is named after, conquered all of his neighbors and enforced a centralized governmental model, putting an end to that post feudal chaos. After doing this, he renamed himself Shi Huangti, or First Emperor. And while order may seem needed at this time, he is actually later remembered for his brutality, not for his ability to organize the new empire. Under Shi Huangti, a capital city was built, and he unified more of China with a single writing system. He also standardized a system of weights and measures, and he divided the empire into manageable sized provinces. Many still stand today. Furthermore, he advanced the silk industry, bringing in merchants and money and adding to China's prosperity. So he doesn't sound like a bad guy so far, right? Yeah, he also did some not so cool stuff. Counter to Confucianism, he ascribed to legalism. Under legalism, humans are seen as evil and selfish, and they need to be kept in check. As such, Qin made all noble families move into his capital city so he could keep an eye on them, and he made it so that no private citizen was allowed to possess weapons. So, as much as he was about progress, he was also about control. Under his rule, people are allowed to own land, but they are also taxed heavily to support the emperor's ambitions. And one of his ambitions was building a great wall. Maybe you've heard of it. He constructed the Great Wall of China from existing walls, improving them and walling in his kingdom to protect against nomadic invaders. Along with the construction of this wall, he ordered the burning of books. Yeah, he ordered the destruction of all philosophical books, including Confucius. Why do you think he did this? Well, he did this because, along with everything else he was organizing, he wanted to standardize the thinking of the people. He didn't want them questioning him. With this order, if folks didn't deliver their books, they'd often be branded with a hot iron and sentenced to 4 years hard labor on the Great Wall, for instance. Also, in this effort, 460 scholars were buried alive for treason. So, yeah, not exactly a great guy. Finally, he ordered the creation of his own tomb. 700,000 people labored for 15 years to build the emperor's tomb, and included in the tomb are 7,000 life-size terracotta warriors, horses, real chariots, and bronze weapons. It seems that Qin tried to take the entire universe with him when he died. Here's an image of his Great Wall, which now traverses roughly 13,000 miles. When it was constructed, he wanted it to be wide enough so that 4 horsemen could easily pass along its path. And here's an image of the pits next to Qin's tomb. Here's where we'd find those 7,000 life-size terracotta warriors and horses equipped with chariots and weapons to protect the emperor in the afterlife. The tomb is even thought to have been booby-trapped against Vandals, making the guards seem even more powerful. And here's a close-up of one of those guards, a cavalryman and his horse. Each of the figures was hand-formed and unique in its design, further adding to the impressive scale of the tomb and its artifacts. And after Qin, there's some hope again. The Han returned some power to the local government, and they developed an elaborate central bureaucracy. Plus, this is the dynasty where they invented paper, allowing for more widespread access to education. And in this dynasty, we also find some of the first cartographers or map makers. Generally, there was intellectual and cultural growth with the Han. They lifted the ban on books and commissioned the reconstruction of philosophical texts. They brought back Confucius, and they honored scholars rather than burying them. And they respected the arts of the people, too. Here, they instituted a music bureau, the Yufei, and in it, bureaucrats were charged with collecting the songs of the people. Eventually, though, even the Han declined. Their fall was precipitated by invasion from surrounding nomadic peoples, but they did leave an impressive culture and arts legacy. And here's an example from some of the era's literary legacy. See if you notice any differences between this work and the earlier work from the Book of Songs. This poem, Lament, was written by a princess. She had been married off to a chieftain from tribal lands in northwest China for a political alliance. He was old and decrepit, and she, as you probably guessed, was not. My family married me off to the other side of heaven, entrusting my welfare to a foreign country. The yurt, my residence, the felt, my walls, meat, my food, fermented milk, my drink. Living here, constantly longing for my native soil, a broken heart. What that I change into a yellow heron, homeward bound. Check out the imagery she's using here. What does she want to become? And what does that image tell you about her? And last but not least, there is beautiful visual art in the Han Dynasty too. And this prancing horse is no exception. Chinese horses in real life were short and slow. This one is the model of a majestic Central Asian horse adopted to China. Notice how it has one leg resting on a swallow. How light would that horse need to be to pull that off? This heavenly horse not only shows off the beauty and delicacy of nature, but as the actual horses were imported, it also shows off the importance of trade. And that, friends, is a little bit about ancient China. In some ways, they have a lot in common with other civilizations we've studied. They have trade and agriculture and systems of government. But in other ways, they're a little different, specifically in their expression of values and beliefs. Hopefully, they've gotten you to look at your culture's expression a little differently too. Until next time.